Whispers of a world of culture. Norway, where the land meets the eternal sea. A sleep story and cultural journey. Close your eyes for a moment, and imagine standing on the edge of a great cliff, looking out over water so still and dark that it reflects the mountains behind you with perfect, mirror-like clarity. Above, the sky is a pale, luminous grey, as though lit from behind by some diffuse and eternal light. The wind here is soft and carries the cold of glacier in it, a clean, mineral cold, unlike any other. Beneath your feet, the rock is ancient beyond imagining, worn smooth by ice and time, and in the valley far below, a narrow arm of the sea reaches inland like a gentle inquiry, its surface unruffled, its depths immeasurable. You are standing in Norway. This is a land that begins at the sea and rises almost immediately into something immense. The coastline of Norway, if you were to straighten all its curves and inlets and islands, would stretch nearly halfway around the world, a shoreline of extraordinary intricacy, cut by thousands of fjords that slice deep into the interior, each one a flooded valley carved by glacier over millions of years and now filled with water of extraordinary clarity and stillness. To travel along this coast is to travel through a landscape that changes almost constantly, that never settles into a single mood, that offers around each headland something unexpected and beautiful. As we begin this long, slow journey together, there is no need to hurry. Let the light of Norway come to you in its own time, and the light here, more than almost anywhere in the world, is something you notice. In summer, the sun barely sets in the far north, and the sky at midnight holds a lingering golden luminosity that makes time feel suspended, elastic, dreaming. In winter, the darkness is deep and long, and the sky, when the night is clear, fills with stars in quantities that startle even those who know to expect them. And sometimes, in the long northern winter nights, the aurora borealis moves across the sky, curtains of green and violet and white light, rippling and shifting in silence, one of the most beautiful natural phenomena on Earth. Norway's geography is shaped above all by two great forces, the sea and the ice. The sea surrounds and penetrates the land from the west, bringing moisture and mild Atlantic air, shaping the character of the coast. The ice, the great glacier of the last ice age, which retreated only 10,000 years ago, carved the valleys and the fjords, ground the mountains into the shapes they hold today, deposited the gravel and clay on which cities and farms have been built. The landscape you see in Norway today is, in a real sense, the landscape that the ice left behind, softened by millennia of weather and vegetation but still fundamentally shaped by that vast, frozen passage. Moving from west to east across the country, the landscape transforms in ways that feel almost theatrical. On the western coast, the fjords are deep and dramatic, the walls of rock rising hundreds of meters above the water, the waterfalls catching the light as they fall from ledge to ledge down the cliff faces. Inland, the fjords give way to high mountain plateaus, the Vidda, vast, open expanses of treeless tundra where the wind moves freely in all directions and the horizon is enormous. Further east, the land descends into forests of pine and birch, the valleys broadening, the rivers running wider and slower, the towns growing larger and more settled. Oslo, in the southeast, sits at the head of the Oslofjord, surrounded by gentle forested hills, a landscape of a completely different temperament from the dramatic west. The Norwegian mountains, the Scandinavian mountains, sometimes called the spine of Scandinavia, run the length of the country from north to south, forming a high, wild barrier between Norway's wet western coast and the drier climates of Sweden and Finland to the east. The highest peak, Galdhøpiggen, rises to more than 2,400 meters, modest by alpine standards, perhaps, but extraordinary in its Arctic setting, its summit glaciated, its slopes descending through zones of tundra and birch forest to the valleys and lakes below. Hiking in the Norwegian mountains is a national passion, a practice embedded so deeply in the culture that it has its own philosophy, its own ethics, its own particular way of moving through the wild. The forests of Norway are old and deep and full of a particular quiet. The pine forests of the interior, with their soft carpet of needles and moss, their dim light and their particular smell of resin and cool earth, have been places of human imagination and meaning for thousands of years. In folk tradition, the forest is not merely a resource or a backdrop. It is a presence, inhabited by beings and energies that require respect and careful attention. This relationship between the human community and the living forest has shaped Norwegian culture in ways that are still visible today, in the love of outdoor life, the sensitivity to the natural world, the deep pleasure taken in the changing seasons. The climate of Norway varies enormously from south to north and from coast to interior. The western coast is milder than its latitude would suggest, warmed by the Gulf Stream, which brings Atlantic water northward along the Norwegian coast and keeps the harbors ice-free even in winter. Bergen, on the western coast, is famous for its rain, the mountains behind it capturing the moisture from the Atlantic and releasing it in a nearly continuous cascade through much of the year. The north of Norway, beyond the Arctic Circle, experiences the midnight sun in summer and the polar night in winter, phenomena that reshape the experience of time and rhythm in ways that take the body several seasons to adjust to and several more to forget. In the quiet rhythm of everyday life, Norwegians move with the seasons in ways that the landscape almost requires. The summer's long light invites an outwardness, a time of cabins and hiking and sailing, of long evenings that seem to stretch endlessly toward a darkness that never quite arrives. Winter's darkness calls for something different, the warmth of the interior, the light of candles, the pleasures of home and hearth, the particular Norwegian concept of Hig's close cousin, kos, a word that encompasses coziness, togetherness, and the simple pleasure of being comfortable and warm when the world outside is cold. These seasonal rhythms run through Norwegian culture as deeply as any music. Norway's national identity is shaped by this landscape in ways that are both conscious and unconscious. To be Norwegian is, in some fundamental sense, to be in relationship with the natural world, the mountains, the sea, the forest, the fjords. The Norwegian word for this relationship, friluftsliv, meaning literally open-air life, is not merely a leisure concept but a cultural philosophy. The idea that human well-being is nourished by regular, direct contact with the natural world, that the proper home of the human being is not only indoors but also outdoors, in all weathers, in all seasons, moving through the landscape with attention and gratitude. As we gently move through time in this documentary, we will follow this layered story with care and quiet attention. We will walk along the fjords and sit inside the warmth of a Norwegian home as the winter dark settles outside. We will taste the food and hear the music. We will follow the beliefs and the festivals and the seasons, tracing the long, patient story of a people who have lived in one of the world's most magnificent landscapes and have made from it something extraordinarily beautiful. For now, simply rest at the edge of the fjord. Imagine the first light of morning spreading across the water, the surface still and silver, the mountains reflected without distortion, a single boat moving slowly toward the open sea. The day is beginning, quietly, gently, as days have begun here for 1,000 years and more. This is Norway, and we have only just begun. History in Norway does not always announce itself loudly. It lives in the landscape, in the names of mountains and fjords that carry the memory of a language spoken 1,000 years ago, in the stave churches that stand in their valleys like carved wooden prayers, in the rock carvings of Alta that show the hands and imaginations of people who lived here 6,000 years before the modern era. To understand Norwegian history is to understand a history shaped by the sea, by the mountains, and by the long, patient work of people adapting to one of the most demanding environments in the temperate world. Let us begin at the beginning, or as close to it as our knowledge reaches. After the last ice age retreated, approximately 10,000 years ago, the land of what is now Norway was gradually colonized by hunter-gatherers moving northward from the south and east, following the retreating glacier into the newly exposed landscape. These early peoples left traces in the rock carvings found at sites across Norway. Images of animals, boats, and human figures, cut into the rock with a care and attention that speaks to something beyond mere record-keeping, something closer to ceremony and wonder. The carvings at Helleristningen in Alta, in the far north, are among the most extensive and best preserved in the world, and they tell, in their indirect way, of a people deeply engaged with the animals and the sea that sustained them. Across centuries, the pattern of settlement in Norway shifted from the mobile life of the hunter-gatherer to the more settled practice of farming, as agricultural techniques arrived from the south. The coastal and fjord landscapes of western Norway proved particularly suitable for small-scale farming. Sheltered valleys with relatively mild climates, good soil at the water's edge, and easy access to the sea for fishing and travel. By the early centuries of the Common Era, a pattern of small farms and scattered communities had established itself across the habitable parts of the Norwegian landscape, a pattern that, in its essentials, persisted for many centuries. The story that most resonates in the Norwegian historical consciousness, and most resonates in world history, is the story of the Vikings. The Viking Age, running roughly from the late 8th to the late 11th centuries, represents a period in which Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish seafarers transformed themselves into one of the most mobile and far-reaching peoples in the history of the world. The technology that made this transformation possible was the Viking longship, a vessel of extraordinary design, light and flexible enough to cross the open ocean and shallow enough to navigate rivers, fast under sail and maneuverable under oar, capable of carrying both warriors and cargo across distances that would have seemed impossible to earlier generations. In moments of change, the Norwegian Vikings moved outward in several directions. Westward, they discovered and settled Iceland, Greenland, and, briefly, the coast of North America. The settlement at Lance Auxiliary Meadows in Newfoundland, dated to around 1,000 years ago, being the most westerly Viking site yet found. Southward and eastward, they raided and traded along the coasts of Britain, Ireland, France, and beyond, establishing settlements at Dublin, York, and many other places. The reputation for ferocity that clings to the word Viking reflects the raiding dimension of this expansion, but the trading and settling dimension was equally important, and many Viking expeditions were primarily commercial ventures, seeking goods and markets as much as plunder. Through quiet resilience, the Norse people also built, in the centuries of the Viking Age, a sophisticated political and legal culture. The Thing, the assembly of free men that gathered to make laws, resolve disputes, and discuss collective decisions, was a foundational institution of Norse society, and the Althing of Iceland, established in 930, is often cited as one of the world's oldest parliaments. This tradition of consultative governance, of the idea that political authority requires some form of consent from those governed, runs through Norwegian political culture to this day, finding its modern expression in the parliamentary democracy that Norway has developed over the past 2 centuries. The gradual Christianization of Norway, beginning in the late 10th and early 11th centuries under kings including Olav Haraldsson, later Saint Olav, the patron saint of Norway, brought profound changes to the culture. The Old Norse religion, with its pantheon of gods, Odin, Thor, Freya, and the rest, gave way, not all at once but over generations, to the new faith. The churches that were built in the centuries following Christianization are among the most distinctive monuments of Norwegian culture. The stave churches, built from vertical wooden planks using a technique derived from earlier traditions of wooden construction, with their elaborately carved portals, their multiple roofs rising in tiers, their dragon heads at the gable ends. A fusion of Christian devotion and Norse aesthetic sensibility that is unlike anything found elsewhere in the world. Over generations, Norway passed through periods of union with Denmark and then with Sweden, periods during which Norwegian culture and language were shaped by outside influences while also maintaining, quietly and persistently, their distinctive character. The long period of Danish rule, lasting roughly from the 14th to the early 19th century, left deep marks on the language and the educated culture of Norway. But Norwegian identity was never simply absorbed into Danish identity, and the romantic nationalism of the 19th century, which swept through Europe in that era, found particularly fertile ground in Norway. The independence movement of the 19th century produced an extraordinary flowering of Norwegian culture, a conscious, deliberate effort to identify, celebrate, and embody what was distinctively Norwegian. The composer Edvard Grieg drew on Norwegian folk melodies in his concert music. The playwright Henrik Ibsen created a body of work that is both deeply rooted in Norwegian social life and universally resonant. The painters of the Norwegian Romantic School, Johan Christian Dahl and others, devoted themselves to rendering the Norwegian landscape in all its dramatic power, insisting that this landscape was not merely scenery but a source of spiritual meaning and national identity. Norway achieved full independence in 1905, when the union with Sweden was dissolved in a peaceful referendum, a moment of quiet but profound significance, celebrated with a restraint that reflected something characteristic of the Norwegian national temperament. The 20th century brought its own upheavals, the occupation of Norway during the Second World War, and the quiet heroism of the Norwegian resistance, remains a touchstone of national memory, a period in which the values of freedom, dignity, and solidarity were tested and, in the judgment of the national story, upheld. As we gently move forward in our journey, we carry this history with us, not as a burden, but as a kind of deep foundation beneath our feet. Norway's story is long and layered, and it continues to be written, day by day, in the extraordinary landscape of the fjords and the forests and the mountains. In the hours ahead, we will explore the culture that has grown from this history, the language, the beliefs, the food, the art, and we will try to understand, softly and without hurry, what it means to be Norwegian in this deep and continuing sense. If you listen closely to Norwegian when it is spoken at an ordinary pace, in an everyday conversation, you begin to notice something particular about its sound. It is a language with a musical quality that is quite distinctive, a rising and falling tone pattern that gives even simple sentences a melodic shape, a sense of the voice moving through a gentle landscape of pitch rather than remaining on a single level. Norwegian is, to many ears, one of the most beautiful of the Scandinavian languages, open and flowing, with a warmth and clarity that reflects the particular character of its speakers and the landscape that shaped them. Norwegian belongs to the North Germanic branch of the Indo-European language family, closely related to Danish and Swedish, and more distantly to English, German, and the other Germanic languages. The historical relationship between these languages is evident in their shared vocabulary. Many Norwegian words are immediately recognizable to speakers of English, particularly older, more fundamental words, hus for house, land for land, man for man, vatten for water. This family resemblance gives Norwegian a certain accessibility to speakers of English that more distant languages lack, though the grammar and the sound system have their own distinctive character that takes time and attention to fully appreciate. The traditional Mongolian script of Norway's linguistic heritage runs not vertically but through the extraordinary history of runic writing, the angular alphabet of the Norse peoples, carved into wood and stone throughout Scandinavia and wherever the Norse traveled. The runes, known collectively as the Futhark, were not merely a writing system but were believed to carry magical and spiritual power, associated with the god Odin, who in the Norse myths hung for 9 days on the world tree Yggdrasil to win their wisdom. Runic inscriptions are found across Norway and the wider Norse world, on memorial stones, on weapons and objects of daily use, on cliff faces and building timbers, each one a small connection to a world of meaning that extended far beyond the utilitarian function of writing. One of the most interesting aspects of the Norwegian linguistic situation is the existence of 2 written standard languages in a country of roughly 5 million people. Bokmål, literally book language, is the most widely used written form, descended from the Danish-influenced written language of the period of Danish rule. Nynorsk, literally New Norwegian, was constructed in the 19th century by the linguist Ivar Aasen, who travelled across the rural Norwegian countryside documenting the dialects spoken by ordinary people, and from this raw material assembled a written standard that drew on the spoken language of the folk rather than the written traditions of the educated class. The existence of these two written standards is not a source of conflict in Norway so much as a source of continuous, good-natured negotiation, a linguistic situation that reflects something important about Norwegian values, particularly the respect for regional diversity and the suspicion of cultural centralization. The Norwegian constitution requires that both standards be used in official contexts, and children in Norwegian schools learn both, though one is designated as their primary form. The spoken dialects of Norway are even more varied than the two written standards suggest. Each region, each valley, sometimes each town, has its own characteristic pronunciation and vocabulary, and these dialects are maintained with a pride and a warmth that speaks to the importance of local identity in Norwegian culture. The sound of Norwegian speech is characterized by its tonal quality, the distinction between two different pitch accents, which can distinguish meanings in otherwise identical words. This tonal dimension gives Norwegian its characteristic melodic quality, the sense of the voice rising and falling through a sentence in a particular, pleasurable pattern. The rhythm of Norwegian speech is also distinctive, relatively even and unhurried, the words given space to complete themselves, the pace suggesting a culture that values thoughtfulness and does not consider silence between sentences to be something that must be filled. If we listen closely to Norwegian expressions and idioms, we begin to hear in them a reflection of the culture from which they grew. Many of the most characteristic Norwegian expressions relate to the natural world, to weather, to the sea, to the mountains, to the particular conditions of the northern life. There is a word, utepils, that means a beer drunk outdoors, but specifically the first beer of the year drunk in the sun, when the temperature has finally risen enough to make sitting outside a pleasure. This word exists because the moment it describes is so particular and so celebrated in Norway that it required its own name. There is friluftsliv, open-air life, a concept that has no simple English equivalent, encompassing the philosophy of outdoor living, of the healing and nourishing relationship between human beings and the natural world. The literary tradition of Norway is old and deep. The Norse sagas, the great prose narratives of the medieval period, recording the histories of kings and chieftains and the settlement of Iceland, are among the finest literary achievements of medieval Europe, combining historical chronicle with narrative skill, psychological depth, and a spare, elegant prose style that reads with remarkable freshness even today. The Edda, the great collection of Norse mythological poetry and prose, is the primary source for our knowledge of the Old Norse religious and mythological world, and it is also, in its own right, a work of literary power, full of vivid imagery and memorable figures. In the 19th and 20th centuries, Norwegian literature produced several writers of genuine international significance. Henrik Ibsen, whose plays transformed the European theatrical tradition in the second half of the 19th century, created works that used the particular social realities of Norwegian middle-class life as a lens through which to examine universal questions of identity, freedom, and moral responsibility. Knut Hamsun, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1920, wrote novels of extraordinary psychological intensity that draw heavily on the Norwegian landscape as both setting and symbol. Sigrid Undset, another Nobel laureate, wrote epic historical novels set in medieval Norway that combine meticulous historical research with a deep sense of character and moral complexity. Over generations, language has been the great carrier of Norwegian culture, the medium through which the stories, the values, and the particular way of seeing the world that is Norwegian have been transmitted from one generation to the next. In a culture with such a strong oral tradition, the Norse sagas were oral before they were written. The folk tales and legends passed from storyteller to listener across the winter evenings before they were collected and printed. The relationship between spoken word and written word is particularly rich and complex. The Norwegian language carries within it the memory of all this passing on, of all the voices that have spoken these words in this particular way, in this particular landscape, across the long centuries. As we move gently forward in our journey, we carry with us the music of this language, the rising and falling tones, the melodic cadences, the words that carry within them the memory of frost and fjord and forest. Language, in Norway, is not simply a tool for communication. It is, itself, a kind of landscape, one that the people of this country have inhabited, shaped, and been shaped by, across the long centuries of their extraordinary history. At the heart of daily life in Norway, there is a quality that is difficult to translate into a single word, but that becomes unmistakable once you have spent time in the country. It is something like a combination of self-sufficiency, communal solidarity, and a deep, unpretentious respect for the ordinary. It is an orientation toward the world that values simplicity and substance over display, that takes quiet pleasure in things done well, that holds the natural world as something not merely beautiful but necessary to human health and happiness. It is, perhaps, the quality that emerges when people live for many generations in a landscape that demands real competence and rewards genuine attention. The concept of janteloven, the law of Janti, is something that Norwegians often mention when asked to describe their own culture, sometimes with pride, sometimes with ambivalence. Originating in the work of the Danish-Norwegian author Axel Sandemos, janteloven describes a set of unwritten social rules that might be summarized as: do not think you are better than anyone else. Do not think you are special. Do not believe your needs or opinions or achievements are more important than those of the community. In many homes across Norway, this principle operates as a gentle leveler of pretension, a social pressure that discourages boastfulness, ostentation, and the kind of self-promotion that is more celebrated in some other cultures. Often, you will find that the values of Norwegian life place a particular emphasis on equality, not merely as a political principle but as a social practice, a daily way of relating to others. The university professor and the fisherman address each other by first names. The politician takes the public bus. The wealthy family's summer cabin, while comfortable, does not display its comfort in ways that set it obviously apart from the cabin next door. This commitment to social equality, to the idea that all citizens deserve equal dignity and equal respect, is deeply embedded in Norwegian culture, and it shapes social interaction at every level, from the most casual conversation to the most formal institutional context. The relationship to work in Norway is shaped by a balance between competence and proportion. Work is taken seriously and done well. The Norwegian reputation for thoroughness and reliability in professional contexts is well founded. But work is also placed in its proper proportion relative to the rest of life, the hours given to family, to outdoor activities, to rest and quiet enjoyment. The long summer vacation, a Norwegian institution of some cultural importance, typically involving a significant period at a cabin in the mountains or by the sea, is not a luxury but a necessity, understood as essential to the health and happiness of individuals and families alike. The right to leisure, to time outside of economic productivity, is held as seriously as the right to work. The cabin, the height, is perhaps the most powerful single symbol of Norwegian values in their everyday expression. A large proportion of Norwegian families own or have access to a cabin, typically located in the mountains or by the sea, typically simple in its amenities, typically reached by some combination of road and foot or ski. The height is a place of retreat from the complexity of modern urban life, a place where the connection to nature that Norwegians regard as essential can be renewed and deepened. The culture of the height encompasses the specific pleasures of hiking, skiing, fishing, and simply sitting with a cup of coffee watching the mountains, as well as the social pleasures of gathering with family and friends in a setting stripped of many of the distractions of ordinary life. Friluftsliv, open-air life, deserves more consideration than we gave it in our section on language, because it is perhaps the most important single concept for understanding Norwegian values. The idea that regular, direct contact with the natural world is not merely pleasant but necessary, that it is a form of sustenance for the human spirit, runs through Norwegian culture with the force of a deep conviction rather than a passing preference. Children are taken outdoors in all weathers from a very young age, the principle being that there is no bad weather, only bad clothing. Schools conduct significant portions of their curriculum outdoors. The elderly and infirm are supported in maintaining their access to nature. The natural world is not a backdrop to Norwegian life, it is a participant in it. Family in Norway typically takes a form that balances independence and closeness. The nuclear family is the primary unit of daily life, but relationships with extended family, grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins, are maintained with care and affection. The role of grandparents in Norwegian family life is significant. Grandparents often play an important part in childcare, in the transmission of values and traditions, in the continuity of family identity across generations. Children are raised with a strong emphasis on independence and self-sufficiency, encouraged to explore and take risks, to solve problems on their own, to develop confidence in their own judgment, alongside a warm and constant sense of belonging to a family and community that cares for them. At the heart of daily life, the Norwegian concept of trygghet, safety, security, a sense of being held in a stable and trustworthy world, is fundamental. The welfare state that Norway has built over the 20th century is an expression of this value. The collective provision of healthcare, education, childcare, and social support reflects a societal commitment to ensuring that all citizens have access to the basic conditions for a dignified life. But trygghet is also something more personal and intimate than any government program. It is the feeling of being known and cared for in one's community, the confidence that one will not be left alone in times of difficulty, the sense of belonging to something larger than oneself that will persist even in the hardest seasons. In the soft fabric of tradition, there is also a deep Norwegian respect for honesty and directness. Norwegians tend to say what they mean, not rudely or insensitively, but clearly, without the layers of diplomatic evasion or polite indirection that characterize social communication in some other cultures. This directness is grounded in a respect for the other person as a capable adult who deserves to be told the truth rather than managed or placated. Combined with the egalitarian ethic, it creates a social environment in which communication is generally straightforward and in which there is relatively little need to read between lines or decode hidden meanings. Over generations, these values, equality, simplicity, honesty, community solidarity, love of the natural world, the proper balance between work and rest, have shaped a culture of remarkable stability and depth. They are values that have been tested by hard conditions, by the long, dark winters, by the demands of fishing and farming in an unforgiving landscape, and have proven their capacity to sustain both individuals and communities through difficulty and change. They are not merely cultural values, they are also, in the deepest sense, wisdom, a set of understandings about what human beings need to live well, developed over many generations of careful, attentive living. If there is a single image that captures something essential about the spiritual life of Norway, it might be this: a stave church standing in a valley, its carved wooden walls and multiple layered roofs rising from the green grass against a backdrop of mountains and grey sky. Around it, the silence is enormous. No traffic sounds, no voices, only the wind, and the occasional call of a bird from the forest edge. The church has stood here for nearly 1,000 years, and the valley has held it, quietly, all that time. Norway's spiritual life is, at its broadest level, the story of a great transition, from the Old Norse religion, with its vibrant pantheon of gods and its cosmological richness, to the Christianity that arrived in the medieval period and gradually became the dominant faith of the Norwegian people. But this simple narrative of replacement misses something important: the way in which the Old Norse spiritual sensibility, the animism, the respect for the natural world, the particular quality of attention to the non-human, persisted beneath and alongside the new faith, shaping Norwegian Christianity in ways that are still visible today, and persisting in the folk traditions and the relationship to the natural world that characterize Norwegian culture at its deepest level. The Old Norse religion, sometimes called asatru, faith in the Aesir gods, was a complex and sophisticated spiritual tradition whose texts and practices have been partly preserved in the Eddas and the sagas. The pantheon included Odin, the god of wisdom, war, and poetry, who hung on the world tree Yggdrasil for 9 days to gain the wisdom of the runes. Thor, the thunder god, whose Hamam Jolna was the protector of humanity against the forces of chaos. Freya, the goddess of love, fertility, and magic, and many others, each with their own domain and their own myths. The cosmology of Norse religion was complex and beautiful, a world held between the roots and branches of the immense world tree, surrounded by various realms of gods, humans, giants, and the dead, moving through time toward the great catastrophe of Ragnarok. The transition to Christianity in Norway was accomplished not all at once but over several generations, through a combination of royal decree, missionary activity, and the slow acculturation of a population that was, perhaps, more open to new spiritual ideas than their reputation for toughness might suggest. The process was not entirely peaceful. The conversion of Norway is associated with the lives and deaths of 2 kings named Olav, but the violence of the conversion story is balanced in the historical memory by the richness of what emerged from the encounter between the Old Norse sensibility and the new Christian one. The stave churches of Norway are the most tangible monument of this encounter. Wooden churches built in the decades and centuries following the conversion, using techniques inherited from the pre-Christian tradition of wooden building and decorated with carvings that blend Christian iconography with Norse artistic motifs. The dragons at the gable ends, the interlacing patterns of the carved portals, the vine scrolls that echo Norse decorative traditions. These are not residues of paganism being gradually eliminated, but deliberate, creative syntheses, expressions of a culture finding new forms for its spiritual life while drawing on the deep resources of its artistic tradition. The Lutheran Reformation of the 16th century brought further transformation to Norwegian religious life. Norway, as part of the Danish realm, followed Denmark into Lutheranism in the 1530s, and the Lutheran Church became the state church, a role it held until 2017, when the Church of Norway was formally separated from the state and became an independent institution. The Lutheran tradition brought with it an emphasis on Scripture, on the individual's direct relationship with God, on simplicity of worship, and on the importance of education and literacy, all values that found resonance in Norwegian culture and shaped the development of schools, literacy, and civic life across the following centuries. In the soft fabric of everyday religious life in contemporary Norway, the picture is complex and interesting. A majority of Norwegians remain nominal members of the Church of Norway, though regular church attendance is relatively low. The great occasions of life, baptism, confirmation, marriage, and burial, are typically marked with church ceremonies, and the church calendar provides a rhythm to the year that most Norwegians observe at least nominally. Christmas and Easter are celebrated with a combination of religious and cultural observance. The light of Christmas candles in the dark Norwegian winter has a particular power, a particular rightness in its context, that goes beyond the strictly religious. Alongside the formal religious life, there persists in Norwegian culture a deep animism, a sense of the natural world as alive and meaningful that is not always expressed in religious terms but that shapes the relationship to the landscape nonetheless. The particular reverence with which Norwegians speak of mountains, of the forest, of the sea, the sense that these are not merely resources or scenery but presences deserving of respect and attention, draws on a spiritual tradition that goes back before Christianity, before the conversion, to the oldest layers of Norwegian culture. There is also in Norwegian culture a strong tradition of folk belief, of the beings and powers that inhabit the landscape, that must be acknowledged and respected, that can be helpful or harmful depending on whether they are treated with the proper consideration. The nis, the household spirit, associated with the farm and its well-being, is perhaps the most familiar of these figures, now safely domesticated into the Christmas tradition, but carrying in its older forms a much more complex and demanding relationship with the humans it lives among. The Huldra, the beautiful creature of the forest, who appears human from the front but has a tail or a hollow back, is a figure from Norwegian folk tradition that speaks to the sense of the wild as something seductive and dangerous, requiring careful navigation. If we listen closely to the spiritual life of Norway, we begin to hear in it a long conversation between the human community and the natural world, between the seen and the unseen, between the inherited forms of faith and the immediate experience of living in a landscape of extraordinary power. This conversation has been going on for many thousands of years, and it continues, in different vocabularies and different registers, to this day. The person who stands on the mountain in the early morning and feels something that they might call awe, gratitude, or simply the overwhelming presence of the world, they are participating in this conversation, whether they know it or not, whether they would use religious language for it or not. As we move gently forward, we carry this spiritual landscape with us, the old gods in their ancient stories, the carved portals of the stave churches, the candlelight of Christmas in the deep winter dark, the animism of the forest and the mountain. Norway's spiritual life is not separate from its daily life, it is woven through it, present in the particular quality of attention that Norwegians bring to the natural world, in the care with which they move through the landscape, in the deep sense of meaning that the seasons and the elements carry in this culture. In the soft fabric of tradition, the Norwegian people have woven a calendar rich with ceremony, celebration, and the quiet observances of daily life. These traditions are not museum pieces, they are living practices, adapted and renewed across generations, carrying the memory of the past into the texture of the present. To be present at a Norwegian celebration is to feel something that is simultaneously familiar and distinctive, a sense of a people who know how to mark the turning points of life and the year with both warmth and simplicity, who understand that ceremony is not performance but connection. 17. Mai, the 17th of May, is Norway's national day, and it is one of the most joyful national celebrations in the world. Unlike many national days, which center on military parades or official ceremonies, Norway's Constitution Day is above all a children's celebration. The traditional image of 17 Mai is the children's parade, thousands of children in their best clothes, carrying flowers and waving Norwegian flags, marching through the streets of every town and city in the country, greeted by crowds of families and friends. The mood is festive and gentle. There are marching bands and ice cream and the particular excitement of children who understand that this day is, in some important sense, theirs. The celebration of 17 Mai reflects something deep in Norwegian values, the emphasis on democracy and egalitarianism, the placing of children and ordinary civic life at the center of the national celebration rather than military power or state authority. The bunad, the traditional Norwegian national costume, is worn by vast numbers of Norwegians on this day. Each regional bunad with its distinctive embroidery and colors, representing the wearer's connection to a particular part of the country. The sight of a Norwegian city street on 17 Mai, filled with people of all ages in their bunads, is one of the most visually beautiful of all Norwegian experiences. Christmas, jul in Norwegian, is the great domestic celebration of the year, and the long Norwegian winter darkness gives it a particular intensity and importance. The preparations begin weeks in advance, the decorating of the house with candles and lights, the baking of the 7 kinds of Christmas cookies, the traditional number, though the recipes vary by region and family, the gathering of the family for the Advent season. Christmas Eve is the center of the celebration, the traditional evening for the family gathering, the Christmas meal, and the opening of gifts. The Christmas meal varies by region and tradition, but common elements include ribby, roast pork ribs, pinnekjart, salted and dried lamb ribs, lutefisk, dried and lye-treated cod, and the sweet rice pudding risgrot, in which a single almond is hidden. Whoever finds it receives a small prize. The midsummer celebration, Sankthansaften, or St. John's Eve, is one of the most atmospheric of Norwegian traditions. On the evening of the 23rd of June, bonfires are lit across the country. On hilltops, on beaches, at the edges of forests, and families and communities gather around the flames as the sun barely sets and the sky holds a luminous, golden twilight that lasts through the night. The tradition of the midsummer bonfire is ancient, pre-Christian in its origins, connected to the turning of the solar year and the protection of the community against the forces of darkness that, in folk belief, are particularly active at the solstice. In its contemporary form, it is a celebration of summer, of community, of the extraordinary Norwegian summer light, with the bonfire serving as a warm heart around which people gather. Easter in Norway is celebrated with a combination of religious observance and a tradition that is distinctly, charmingly Norwegian, the påskekrim, or Easter crime. During the week of Easter, Norwegians traditionally read crime fiction. The newspapers publish crime stories on their covers, television and radio broadcast crime dramas, and the sale of crime novels spikes dramatically. The tradition is said to have begun with a clever advertising campaign in 1923, in which a crime novel was advertised on the front page of a newspaper in a manner so convincing that readers initially believed they were reading a news story. The tradition took root and has flourished for nearly a century, becoming so deeply embedded in the culture that it now feels as natural as the Easter eggs and the yellow narcissus flowers that are the other symbols of Norwegian spring. The confirmation, confirmasjon, is a significant rite of passage in Norwegian social life, typically celebrated at the age of 15. For those confirmed in the church, it marks the young person's formal affirmation of the Christian faith they received in baptism. But in Norway, a civil confirmation, humanistisk confirmasjon, is also widely practiced, organized by the Norwegian Humanist Association and celebrating the transition to adulthood in secular terms, with an emphasis on values, responsibility, and the ethical dimensions of the good life. Both forms are celebrated with family gatherings, gifts, and a meal. The confirmation party is an important social event, and the gifts given to the confirmand are typically substantial, often including jewelry, money, or significant items to mark the transition to a new stage of life. The bunad, the traditional Norwegian regional costume, deserves its own consideration, as it is both a garment and a ceremony in itself. Each of the many regional bunads represents a specific geographic area of Norway, with distinctive colors, embroidery patterns, and accessories. The bunad of Hardanger is different from that of Telemark, which is different from that of Røros or Troms or any of the other regions. The wearing of a bunad is a statement of pride in one's regional identity and in Norwegian cultural heritage, and it is not reserved for special occasions only, though 17. Mai and Christmas are the peak moments, but also worn at weddings, confirmations, and other significant gatherings throughout the year. Over generations, these traditions have proven their capacity to hold time together, to create points of shared meaning in the flow of the year, moments when the community gathers and recognizes itself, when the past speaks through the present, when the individual life is placed, with care and with ceremony, in its proper relationship to the larger whole. They are not simply customs. They are, in the deepest sense, the practices by which a people sustains its sense of who it is, its memory, its values, its particular way of being together in the world. As we move gently forward in our journey, we carry with us the images of these ceremonies, the children in their best clothes on 17. Mai, the bonfires on the summer solstice, the candles of Christmas in the winter dark, the family gathered around the Easter table with a crime novel nearby. These images are not from a distant past, they are from the living present of a people who know the value of what they carry. Imagine stepping into a Norwegian kitchen on a cold autumn evening. The windows are steaming with the warmth from the stove, and the smell that fills the air is deep and savory. The long-cooked richness of lamb, perhaps, or the sweet, slightly smoky note of cured salmon, or the simple, comforting smell of potatoes boiling in their skins. The table is already set, candles lit even though it is not yet fully dark, Because in Norway the candlelight is not a special occasion but an ordinary grace, a daily acknowledgement of the pleasure of warmth in a cold country. Your host moves with the unhurried confidence of someone who has been cooking this way for a long time, and the meal that is being prepared has been prepared, in this or very similar forms, in this landscape for many generations. Norwegian cuisine is, at its heart, a cuisine of the land and the sea, a food culture shaped by the extraordinary natural resources of a country with one of the longest coastlines in the world, an abundance of fresh water, fertile if cool farmland in its valleys, and forests full of game and berries and mushrooms. The central ingredients of Norwegian cooking are fish, lamb, pork, dairy products, and the preserves, the curing, smoking, salting, and fermenting, that allow the abundance of summer and autumn to be carried through the lean months of the long Norwegian winter. Fish is the cornerstone of Norwegian food culture, as it has been for thousands of years. The seas off the Norwegian coast are among the most productive in the world. The cold, clear Atlantic waters rich in nutrients, the fjords providing sheltered nursery grounds for countless species. Cod, torsk, is perhaps the most historically significant of Norwegian fish, the fish that sustained Norwegian communities through the lean months, that was dried on racks to make stockfish and preserved in salt to make klippfisk, and that was traded across the world from the medieval period onward. Norwegian stockfish was a commodity of genuine international importance in the pre-modern world, traded as far as West Africa and the Americas, providing protein for populations far removed from any ocean. Salmon, laks, is the fish that has become Norway's most internationally recognized food product in the modern era, but it has also been a central part of the Norwegian diet for millennia. The salmon that run up the Norwegian rivers in summer were a prize of extraordinary value, and the techniques for catching and preserving them, the salmon traps, the nets, the smoking and curing, are among the oldest food traditions in the country. Gravlax, salmon cured in salt, sugar, and dill, is one of Norway's great contributions to the culinary world, a preparation of beautiful simplicity in which the quality of the fish itself is both the starting point and the whole point. The cured salmon, sliced thin and laid across dark bread with a mustard dill sauce, is one of the most elegant of Norwegian foods, and one of the most expressive of the Norwegian aesthetic. Understated, precise, deeply satisfying. The open sandwich, the smørbrød, is the basic unit of the Norwegian meal, particularly at lunch. On dark, dense rye bread or on lighter wheat rolls, a carefully assembled combination of toppings is built up: smoked salmon, shrimp, cured meats, eggs, strong cheese, cucumber, tomato, fresh dill, each element chosen for its flavor and its visual contribution to the whole. The Norwegian approach to the open sandwich is both artful and practical. It is a meal that requires no cooking, can be assembled from whatever is in the refrigerator, and yet, when done with care and attention, achieves something genuinely beautiful. The lunch table in a Norwegian home or office, spread with the materials for open sandwiches, is a small theatre of simple pleasures. Lamb is the king of Norwegian meat, and the traditional lamb dishes of Norway are among the most deeply flavorful in any cuisine. Fårikål, mutton and cabbage stew, is the national dish of Norway, a preparation of disarming simplicity. Whole pieces of lamb on the bone, layered with cabbage, seasoned with salt and whole peppercorns, and left to cook slowly for several hours until the meat falls from the bone and the broth has become a deep, silky, intensely flavored liquid. The dish requires time and patience more than skill, and it rewards both. Fårikål is a late summer and autumn dish, traditionally made when the new season's lamb and cabbage are ready, and the first fårikål of the autumn has something of the character of a ritual meal, the marking of a seasonal turning. Pinnekjøtt, salted and dried lamb ribs, steamed over birch twigs, is the Christmas dish of Western Norway, one of the most regionally distinctive and culturally charged of all Norwegian foods. The preparation begins weeks before Christmas, when the ribs are soaked to rehydrate and desalinate them, then steamed until tender and served with mashed swede and potatoes. The flavor is intensely, beautifully salty and smoky, with a depth that comes from the drying process and the particular quality of the Norwegian lamb. The sheep that graze on the Norwegian mountains and coastal pastures have a diet rich in wild herbs and grasses that gives their meat a distinctive character. To eat pinnekjart is to eat something that has been made, in this way, in these valleys and on these mountains, for a very long time. The dairy tradition of Norway is rich and distinctive. Norwegian brown cheese, brunost, made by boiling whey until the sugars caramelize and the liquid reduces to a thick, fudge-like consistency, is one of the most unusual and characteristic of Norwegian foods. Sliced thin on dark bread with butter, it has a sweet, slightly tart, deeply savory flavor that is unlike anything else, and that Norwegians regard with an almost tribal devotion. Rom, Norwegian sour cream, is used in cooking and as a condiment with a freedom and generosity that speaks to the dairy richness of this culture. The tradition of making butter, cheese, and preserves from the summer's milk production, taking place in the mountain dairy farms, the setter, to which the cattle were driven in summer, is one of the oldest continuous food practices in Norway. Coffee is the great social lubricant of Norwegian daily life. Norway is one of the highest per capita coffee consumers in the world, and the culture of coffee drinking is more important than the coffee itself in many ways. The offer of a cup of coffee is the standard Norwegian gesture of welcome and hospitality, the prelude to any serious conversation, the comfort offered in times of difficulty, the pleasure shared in times of happiness. Norwegian coffee is strong and simply prepared, drunk black or with a little milk, and it is drunk at all hours of the day and evening without the caffeine anxiety that affects coffee drinkers in some other cultures. The kitchen table, the coffee pot, and the conversation. This is the basic social unit of Norwegian domestic life. Over generations, the food culture of Norway has been shaped by the landscape and the climate that the landscape carries. It is a cuisine of preservation and patience, of people who learn to extract from the cold, dark, generous land and sea everything that sustained them, and to do so with an intelligence and care that turned necessity into art. The simplicity of Norwegian food at its best is not a limitation but a form of precision, the precision of people who know exactly what they need and exactly how to provide it, without waste or excess, with a satisfaction in the fitting of means to ends that is one of the most enduring pleasures of the table. Every culture builds, over time, an invisible architecture, a set of shared understandings, unspoken rules, and conventional behaviors that allow people to move through the world together with a minimum of friction and a maximum of mutual respect. In Norway, this invisible architecture is particularly interesting to observe, because it reflects, in such clear and coherent ways, the values of a society that has made equality and individual dignity its foundational commitments. To understand the social norms of Norway is, in a sense, to understand a society's attempt to live according to its stated values, and to see how successfully, and how imperfectly, that attempt plays out in the texture of daily life. The first thing that many visitors notice about Norwegian social life is the quality of the silence. Norwegians are, by the standards of many cultures, quiet people, comfortable with pauses in conversation, not compelled to fill every silence with speech, happy to sit in the company of others without the continuous verbal activity that other cultures might find necessary. This comfort with silence is not unfriendliness. It is, rather, a form of respect, a recognition that not everything needs to be said, that the presence of another person is itself a form of communication, that silence shared is not empty but full. The visitor who has learned to be comfortable with Norwegian silence will find themselves welcomed into a social world of considerable warmth and depth. The norm of social equality expresses itself in Norwegian life in countless ways, large and small. In the workplace, the relationship between managers and employees tends to be relatively flat. Norwegian management culture values consultation, consensus, and the idea that good ideas can come from anyone in the organization, regardless of their formal position. Titles are used rarely and first names almost always. The sense of distance that titles create is felt, in Norwegian culture, as an unnecessary barrier between people who are, after all, equally human. The combination of formal competence and informal ease that characterizes Norwegian professional life can be surprising to visitors from more hierarchical cultures, but it reflects a genuine conviction that dignity and respect are not diminished by informality. The concept of privacy and personal space is important in Norwegian social life. There is a Norwegian saying, "Minnet stue, minnet borg," "My living room is my castle," that speaks to the value placed on the home as a private space, a place apart from the social world, protected from intrusion. The invitation to a Norwegian home for a meal or a gathering is therefore a significant gesture, not to be taken casually. It represents a genuine opening of the private sphere to the guest, and it calls for a corresponding appreciation and consideration. The host who has prepared a meal, decorated the table, and organized the evening has done something real and meaningful, and the guest who acknowledges this with gratitude and attention is meeting the gesture in the spirit in which it was offered. Time in Norwegian social and professional life is taken seriously. Appointments are kept, meetings begin on schedule, and the expectation that one's time and others' time will be used respectfully is deeply embedded in the culture. Punctuality is not a formality but a form of respect, the acknowledgement that the other person's time is as valuable as one's own, that to keep someone waiting is to impose a cost on them that has not been agreed to. This relationship with time reflects the broader Norwegian value of equality. All time is equally valuable, regardless of whose it is, and therefore all time deserves equal respect. The relationship between Norwegians and strangers is a subject that generates much reflection and some gentle humor among Norwegians themselves. On the street, on public transport, in the supermarket, the social norm is to maintain a respectful distance, not to make eye contact unnecessarily, not to initiate conversation without a reason, not to encroach on the personal space that each person moves through as a kind of invisible private territory. This reserve is sometimes described, by visitors from more gregarious cultures, as coldness, but this interpretation misses something important. The Norwegian reserve in public spaces is not indifference to others but a form of respect, the recognition that each person in a shared public space has a right to their own private experience, that sociability should be chosen rather than imposed. When Norwegians do establish social connection, it tends to be warm, genuine, and lasting. The friendships formed in Norwegian culture are typically deep and long-standing, built slowly, through shared experience and mutual trust, and then maintained with a loyalty that reflects the importance given to these bonds. The Norwegian friend who has known you for 20 years is a different kind of friend from the acquaintance of a party or the colleague of the office. The depth of the relationship has been earned through time and shared history, and it carries a weight and a meaning that reflects that investment. The role of gender in Norwegian social life has been shaped by decades of conscious, policy-driven commitment to gender equality. Norway has been a world leader in the development of parental leave policies, childcare provision, gender quotas for corporate boards, and other measures designed to create more equal conditions for men and women in economic and social life. The results of these policies are visible in the relatively high representation of women in professional and political life, in the significant take-up of parental leave by Norwegian fathers, and in the general social expectation that domestic responsibilities will be shared more equally between partners. The movement toward gender equality is not complete. As in all societies, real practices do not always match stated values, but the direction is clear and the commitment broadly shared. In the quiet rhythm of everyday social life, what is most striking about Norway is perhaps the consistency of a certain quality of considerateness, a thoughtfulness in social interaction that expresses itself not in grand gestures but in small, consistent attentions. The person who holds the door, who yields on the hiking path, who picks up litter in the forest, who slows their car when they see a pedestrian. These are not exceptional acts but ordinary expressions of a social ethic that places the comfort and safety of others alongside one's own. This considerateness is not performed for social reward. It is so deeply habitual that it often passes unnoticed, which is, in a sense, exactly as it should be. Over generations, these norms have served the Norwegian people well, creating the social conditions for a society of remarkable cohesion, mutual trust, and functional cooperation. A society in which the institutions work because the people who operate them and depend on them have internalized the values that make institutional life possible. They are not, of course, perfect. No social norms are, but they reflect an ongoing collective effort to live together in a way that honors the dignity and the freedom of each individual while maintaining the bonds of community that make individual flourishing possible. Imagine a figure moving along a mountain path in late spring, the snow still lying in the hollows, the first wildflowers coming through at the path's edge. The figure is wearing practical hiking clothes, layers of wool and synthetic fabric chosen for warmth, mobility, and weather resistance. But over the pack on their back, you can see the folded colors of a bunad, carried carefully for the celebration at the end of the journey. This is the Norwegian relationship with clothing in something like its essence. The practical and the ceremonial, the technical and the traditional, the modern and the historic, held together in the same backpack, worn by the same body, in the same landscape. The bunad is the center of Norwegian clothing tradition, a garment that is simultaneously a regional costume, a work of art, a personal heirloom, and a statement of national identity. Unlike the national costumes of many countries, which have become largely ceremonial or touristic, the bunad in Norway is genuinely alive. Worn by hundreds of thousands of Norwegians on significant occasions throughout the year, made by skilled craftspeople, researched and documented with meticulous historical care, and regarded with a warmth and pride that goes well beyond mere nostalgia. Each of the regional bunads reflects the textile traditions and aesthetic sensibilities of a specific part of Norway. The colors, the embroidery patterns, the silver jewelry, the cut and construction of the garment all varying according to the regional tradition from which it comes. The Hardanger bunad, from the Fjord region of western Norway, is known for the Hardanger embroidery, Hardangersum, that decorates its collar and cuffs, an openwork embroidery technique of extraordinary delicacy, in which threads are drawn from the fabric and the remaining threads are worked into geometric patterns of great beauty. The Telemark bunad is known for its rich red, black, and white colors and its boldly decorative embroidery. The Sami people of northern Norway have their own distinctive traditional garments, the gakti, in the bright colors and bold patterns that are characteristic of Sami aesthetic tradition. The silver jewelry that accompanies the bunad is an important part of the complete outfit, particularly the solja, a traditional Norwegian brooch in silver with hanging pendants that catch the light when the wearer moves. Solja come in a variety of regional forms, each with its own characteristic design, and they are often family heirlooms, passed from grandmother to mother to daughter, carrying the family's history in their silver filigree. The craftsmanship of the solja is a significant Norwegian artistic tradition, with silversmiths across the country working in styles that have been refined over centuries, combining technical precision with a sensitivity to the aesthetic traditions of the region. The contemporary Norwegian approach to everyday clothing is shaped above all by two values: functionality and quality. The long, dark, cold, wet Norwegian winter requires clothing that actually works, that keeps the wearer warm and dry, that allows for the physical activities that are so central to Norwegian life, that performs reliably across the demanding conditions of the Norwegian outdoors. The Norwegian outdoor clothing industry, brands including Helly Hansen, Bergens, Narona, and others, has developed garments of genuine technical sophistication, drawing on a long tradition of knowledge about what the human body needs in cold and wet conditions, and combining that knowledge with modern materials science to produce clothing that is both highly functional and often beautifully designed. Wool, particularly Norwegian wool, and the distinctive wool of the Norwegian Dala sheep, has a special place in Norwegian clothing culture. The Norwegian sweater, the looskoft, or lice sweater, named for the small pattern of repeating dots that is its most characteristic decoration, is perhaps the single most internationally recognized symbol of Norwegian folk craft. The traditional Norwegian sweater, knitted in white and black or other natural colors in patterns that vary by region and family tradition, is warm, dense, and extraordinarily beautiful. A garment that is also a kind of textile art, each pattern carrying in its geometry and its history a particular identity and belonging. In the soft fabric of tradition, the art of knitting is deeply embedded in Norwegian domestic life. The long winter evenings, with their darkness and their enforced indoor time, were historically the season for textile work, for the spinning and knitting and weaving that produced the clothing and household textiles the family needed. The patterns of traditional Norwegian knitting, the all-over patterns of the Selbu mitten, the geometric motifs of the Akel weaving, the bold colorwork of the traditional sweater, are a visual language developed over generations, each pattern a form of knowledge about shape, color, and the possibilities of the medium that was transmitted through practice and imitation rather than written instruction. The relationship between fashion and traditional craft in contemporary Norwegian clothing culture is genuinely interesting. There is a significant movement, particularly among younger Norwegians, to engage with traditional textile techniques, knitting, embroidery, weaving, not as nostalgic recreation but as genuine creative practice, combining traditional patterns and techniques with contemporary design sensibilities and modern materials. This engagement with tradition as a living creative resource rather than a museum piece reflects a broader cultural quality that we have encountered throughout this journey: the Norwegian capacity to maintain a real relationship with the past while remaining fully present in the contemporary. The outdoor clothing that Norwegians wear for hiking, skiing, and other outdoor activities has its own aesthetic, an aesthetic of functionality carried to the point where it becomes its own kind of beauty. The right gear for the right conditions, worn with the confidence of someone who knows what they are doing and has been doing it all their life. This is an aesthetic that Norwegians recognize and respect, and that is in its own way as distinctive and culturally expressive as the bunad or the traditional sweater. The mountain jacket and the ski boots carry a different kind of meaning from the embroidered collar and the silver solja, but they carry meaning nonetheless, the meaning of competence, of preparedness, of belonging to a culture that takes the outdoor world seriously and moves through it with skill and pleasure. Over generations, Norwegian clothing has been both a practical response to demanding conditions and a form of cultural expression, a way of being in the world that is both functional and beautiful, both rooted in place and tradition and responsive to the changing needs of contemporary life. The bunad and the hiking jacket, the traditional sweater and the lightweight rain shell, the solja and the headlamp, all of these are, in their different ways, expressions of the same underlying identity. A people who live in a magnificent, demanding landscape and have learned, over many generations, to dress for it. There is a moment in the opening bars of Edvard Grieg's piano concerto in a minor when the music seems to reach back into something ancient, a sound that is both completely of its time and somehow older, more rooted, as though the composer has found a way to let the Norwegian landscape speak through the notes. The cascading scales of the piano, the broad, singing theme of the orchestra, these are things that feel simultaneously composed and discovered, as though the music was already there, in the mountains and the fjords, waiting for someone with the skill and the sensitivity to hear it and write it down. Music has always been central to Norwegian cultural life, from the oldest folk traditions to the most contemporary expressions. The folk music of Norway, the traditional tunes and songs passed down through generations of rural communities, is one of the richest and most distinctive folk music traditions in Europe, preserving melodic and rhythmic patterns of great antiquity alongside more recent innovations and adaptations. The hardanger fiddle, the hardingfeel, is the central instrument of Norwegian folk music, and it is one of the most fascinating instruments in the world. A fiddle with 4 or 5 sympathetic strings beneath the playing strings, which vibrate in resonance when the melody strings are played, creating a rich, droning undertone that gives the music a quality unlike anything produced by a standard violin. The hardanger fiddle tradition encompasses a vast repertoire of dance tunes, ceremonial pieces, and more contemplative forms. The listening pieces, lyre slatter, that are not for dancing but for deep attention, that speak of the landscape and the supernatural in music of great beauty and occasional strangeness. The slatter, the traditional tunes, are associated with specific places, specific events, specific emotional qualities, and the tradition of transmitting them is as carefully maintained as the tradition of the tunes themselves, through personal teaching from master to student across the generations. The Norwegian folk song tradition is equally rich, encompassing lyric songs, ballads, work songs, lullabies, and the wordless improvisational vocal form known as the kulok or cow calling, in which the herdswomen of the mountain dairy farms called their cattle home across the valleys with long, undulating, beautiful melodies. These vocal traditions reflect the particular acoustic conditions of the Norwegian landscape, the distance across which sound must carry, the qualities of the mountainous terrain, the particular character of the Norwegian summer air, and they carry in their shapes a form of knowledge about this landscape that goes beyond what can be expressed in words. Edvard Grieg, Norway's most celebrated composer, spent his career in deliberate and loving engagement with this folk tradition, drawing on the melodies and rhythms of Norwegian folk music to create concert works of worldwide fame and enduring beauty. His Peer Gyllene Suites, written to accompany the dramatic poem by Henrik Ibsen, contain some of the most recognizable passages in the orchestral repertoire. Morning Mood, with its rising flute melody suggesting the light coming over the Norwegian mountains. In the Hall of the Mountain King, with its inexorable, building intensity. Solveig's Song, of a heartbreaking simplicity and directness. Grieg's music has shaped the world's imagination of Norway in ways that continue to resonate. The sound of his piano writing in particular, with its modal harmonies and its particular Norwegian quality of color and light, is instantly evocative of the landscape that shaped it. Literature is perhaps the art form in which Norway's contribution to world culture is most clearly visible. Henrik Ibsen, sometimes called the father of modern drama, created in his plays a body of work that transformed the European theatre in the second half of the 19th century. His plays, A Doll's House, Hedda Gabler, The Wild Duck, Ghosts, brought to the stage a psychological realism and a moral seriousness that were revolutionary for their time, using the detailed social world of the Norwegian middle class as a lens through which to examine universal questions of freedom, authenticity, responsibility, and the cost of social conformity. Ibsen's heroines, Nora, Hedda, Elida, are among the most complex and compelling female characters in dramatic literature, and the plays in which they appear continue to be performed to full houses in theatres around the world. Knut Hamsun, whose novel Hunger is among the most psychologically intense works in Norwegian literature, brought to the novel a stream of consciousness interiority and a sensitivity to the marginal, the vagrant, the socially excluded that anticipated the techniques of literary modernism. His later novels, particularly The Growth of the Soil, painted a magnificent portrait of the relationship between human beings and the Norwegian land. The slow, patient work of farming and building and enduring across the seasons, the particular quality of Norwegian rural life in its most fundamental form. The visual arts of Norway are dominated, in the international imagination, by the work of Edvard Munch, whose painting The Scream is one of the most recognized images in the history of art. Munch's work is an expression of intense psychological states, anxiety, desire, melancholy, the overwhelming force of the unconscious, rendered in color and line with an expressionist power that goes far beyond decorative beauty. But Munch's work is also deeply Norwegian in its settings and its atmosphere. The landscape behind The Scream is the Oslofjord at dusk, and the color of the sky in that painting, the swirling, burning orange and red, is a real sky, observed in a real place, at a real moment, before it was transformed by the pressure of the artist's interior experience into something universal. The landscape painting tradition of 19th century Norway, the romantic school that drew inspiration from the dramatic scenery of the fjords and the mountains, produced works of genuine grandeur and beauty, most notably in the paintings of Johan Christian Dahl, whose large-format canvases of Norwegian mountain landscapes combine naturalistic observation with a romantic sense of the sublime that places them in dialogue with the great landscape traditions of the period while remaining distinctly Norwegian in their subject matter and their atmosphere. Contemporary Norwegian art and culture is diverse, vibrant, and internationally engaged, encompassing literature, film, music, visual art, architecture, and design in forms that draw on the specific Norwegian context while participating fully in global conversations. Norwegian cinema has produced a number of internationally acclaimed films in recent decades, often drawing on the particular qualities of the Norwegian landscape, its light, its scale, its seasonal extremes, as a primary element of their visual and narrative language. Norwegian architects have made significant contributions to the global conversation about sustainable building and the relationship between architecture and landscape. As we move gently forward, we carry with us the music of the Hardingfeel and the piano concerto, the image of Munch's burning sky, the words of Ibsen's heroines speaking their hard truths in comfortable Norwegian parlours, the knitting pattern of the traditional sweater as a form of abstract visual art. Art in Norway, in all its forms, is an attempt to find the form that fits the content, to make something that is exactly right for its place, its time, and its people. This attempt, made with the honesty and the care that are characteristic of Norwegian culture at its best, produces something genuine and enduring. Every society builds, over time, systems for organizing collective life, for making decisions, distributing resources, educating the young, and caring for those who need care. In Norway, these systems have been shaped by a particular combination of forces: the democratic traditions of the Thing assemblies, the Lutheran emphasis on individual conscience and communal responsibility, the labor movement's long campaign for workers' rights and social protection, and the social democratic ideology that became dominant in the 20th century. The result is a social order of distinctive character, one that places human dignity, equality, and collective welfare at its explicit center, and that has developed, through decades of democratic negotiation, institutions of remarkable effectiveness and breadth. The political system of Norway is a constitutional monarchy with a parliamentary structure, a form of governance in which the hereditary monarch plays a largely ceremonial and symbolic role, while real political power is exercised by an elected parliament, the Storting, and a government drawn from the parliamentary majority. The Storting has 169 members, elected by proportional representation from the country's regions, and it meets in the parliamentary building in Oslo throughout most of the year. The system is designed to produce coalition governments rather than single-party majorities, which means that Norwegian politics typically involves ongoing negotiation and compromise between parties of different orientations, a process that, while sometimes slow, tends to produce broadly acceptable outcomes and to maintain democratic legitimacy across the political spectrum. The Norwegian welfare state, the comprehensive system of social provision that guarantees universal access to healthcare, education, and social support, is one of the most developed in the world, and it is a source of genuine national pride and broad political consensus. The national insurance scheme, Folketrygden, covers all Norwegian residents, providing health insurance, pension rights, unemployment benefits, and various other social protections. The state-funded healthcare system provides universal access to medical care without the financial barriers that characterize healthcare access in many other countries. The education system, from kindergarten through university, is free or heavily subsidized at all levels, and the quality of education provision is consistently high across the country. The Norwegian education system deserves particular attention, because it reflects the values of Norwegian culture in particularly clear ways. The emphasis on equality of opportunity means that the quality of schooling provided in a small rural community should not, in principle, be significantly inferior to that provided in Oslo. The state invests heavily in maintaining educational standards across the country, including in remote areas that would be economically marginal if left to market provision alone. The pedagogy of the Norwegian school is characterized by a relatively low emphasis on formal testing and ranking in the early years, a high degree of pupil autonomy and project-based learning, significant time spent outdoors. The outdoor learning tradition, utskole, is embedded in the curriculum, and a strong emphasis on democratic values, critical thinking, and the development of the whole person. The economy of Norway has been shaped decisively by the discovery of oil and natural gas in the North Sea in the 1960s, a development that has given Norway one of the highest per capita incomes in the world and has funded the expansion and maintenance of the welfare state over the past half-century. The management of Norway's oil wealth reflects the social democratic values of the political culture, rather than allowing the revenues to flow immediately into consumption or to create dependence on a single volatile commodity. Norway established the Government Pension Fund Global in 1990, into which the surplus revenues from oil production are invested. This fund, now the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world, serves as a buffer against the volatility of oil prices and as a savings pool for future generations, reflecting a commitment to intergenerational equity that is one of the most admirable aspects of Norwegian economic governance. The traditional fishing and farming industries that sustained Norwegian communities for millennia remain significant in the contemporary economy, even if their relative share of national income has declined in the age of oil. Norwegian aquaculture, particularly the salmon farming industry, has grown to be a major global industry, making Norway the world's largest producer of farmed salmon. The fishing fleet that works the Norwegian coast and the northern Atlantic is one of the most technologically sophisticated in the world, and the communities built around fishing and marine industries remain important centers of Norwegian life, particularly in the north and along the western coast. The legal system of Norway is based on the civil law tradition, with a constitution that dates from 1814, one of the oldest in Europe still in force, and a body of legislation and precedent that has developed over the 2 centuries since. The Norwegian legal tradition emphasizes the rule of law, the independence of the judiciary, and the protection of individual rights, including the rights of the accused in criminal proceedings. The Norwegian prison system has attracted international attention for its emphasis on rehabilitation rather than punishment. The prisons of Norway are, by international standards, humane and focused on preparing prisoners for a successful return to society, and Norway's rates of recidivism are among the lowest in the world. Environmental law and policy have become increasingly central to the Norwegian political agenda, as the contradictions between Norway's status as a major oil producer and its commitment to environmental sustainability have become harder to ignore. Norway has set ambitious targets for reducing carbon emissions and transitioning to renewable energy. It already generates the vast majority of its electricity from hydropower, one of the great renewable energy advantages of the Norwegian landscape, and it has been a world leader in the electrification of transport, with electric vehicles making up a very high proportion of new car sales. The relationship between Norway and the other Nordic countries, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and Iceland, is characterized by a deep cultural affinity, historical ties, and a high degree of practical cooperation. The Nordic Council and Nordic Council of Ministers provide frameworks for inter-parliamentary and intergovernmental cooperation on a wide range of issues. Citizens of the Nordic countries can live and work in any other Nordic country without visa requirements, and the social insurance systems are coordinated to provide portability of rights across borders. This Nordic cooperation reflects both the cultural commonalities of the region and a shared commitment to the social democratic values that have shaped the development of all the Nordic welfare states. Over generations, Norway has built, through the patient work of democratic negotiation and social solidarity, a society that comes closer than most to embodying the values it professes: equality, freedom, dignity, and the common good. This achievement is not final or perfect, no human society is, but it is real, and it reflects the cumulative effect of many generations of people who took seriously the question of how to live together well. As we move gently toward the close of our journey, we carry with us the image of this society, not as a utopia or a model to be copied, but as a particular, imperfect, genuinely achieved expression of the human aspiration to build something good together. As night settles over the Norwegian mountains, the stars come out with a clarity that the long summer twilight had concealed. There is no light pollution on the high plateau. The nearest town is far below, invisible at this elevation, and the sky, which by day seems simply blue and vast, reveals at night that it holds a depth and a richness that the daylight never quite suggested. The Milky Way arches from horizon to horizon, a river of light crossing the dark ceiling of the world, and in the north, if the night is cold and clear, there is the aurora, the northern lights, moving in their unhurried, extraordinary way across the sky, green, and sometimes violet, rippling and shifting in silence, a phenomenon so beautiful and so improbable that it feels, even after many viewings, like something happening for the first time. And below that sky, a single light burns in the window of a mountain cabin, the height, dark against the hillside except for that one warm square of yellow light. Inside, someone is sitting at a table with a cup of coffee, reading, or simply watching the night, or talking with whoever has come on this journey with them. The fire in the stove makes a small, steady sound. The coffee is strong and black. Outside, the wind moves through the grass of the high plateau, and the silence between the sounds is enormous and full. This is what Norway leaves in the heart of those who encounter it with open attention, a sense of proportion. The usual scales of things, the usual measures of urgency and importance, shift slightly when held against the scale of the Norwegian landscape. The mountains do not hurry. The fjords did not form quickly. The forest has been here since long before anyone now living was born and will be here long after. To spend time in this landscape with the patience it invites is to receive something that is very hard to name and very easy to feel. A recalibration, a quieting, a sense of being held in something much larger and older than the concerns of the day. In the quiet rhythm of everyday life, Norwegians move between the demands of the present and the depth of the past with a characteristic ease. The hiker who sets out on a mountain path on a Saturday morning is doing something that Norwegians have done for as long as there have been mountains to walk on and legs to walk with, and they know it, in some non-verbal but deeply felt way, and it gives the walk a dimension of meaning that goes beyond physical exercise or the pleasure of the view. To be moving through this landscape, in this particular way, is to be part of something continuous, a thread in the long weaving of human life in this particular place. And yet Norway is not a country turned toward the past or anxious to remain there. The young architect designing a new public building that uses local materials and sits lightly on the landscape, the musician combining the old hard-anger fiddle melodies with contemporary electronic production, the chef working with traditional Norwegian ingredients in the context of modern culinary technique. These people are not less Norwegian for their modernity. They are carrying the same orientation toward the world, the respect for quality, the attention to the specific, the sense of being exactly in this place, into new contexts, finding new forms for ancient commitments, adding their own contribution to the long conversation between the Norwegian people and the land they inhabit. If we listen closely to the soul of Norway, we begin to hear what connects all the things we have encountered in this long journey. The landscape and the culture, the language and the food, the music and the ceremonies, the social norms and the welfare state. What connects them is, at its core, a particular relationship with reality, an insistence on the genuine, the specific, the concrete. Norwegian culture, at its best, has a quality of solidity, of things being what they say they are, of people doing what they say they will do, of values being expressed in practice rather than merely professed in theory. This quality, call it integrity, or groundedness, or simply authenticity, is the soul of what we have been tracing throughout this journey. The Hardingfeel plays at the edge of the evening. The sound rises into the still air, the sympathetic strings creating their distinctive undertone, the melody winding through the modal scales that connect it to its folk origins, the performer bowing with the absorbed attention of someone who has practiced this for years and is still, always, discovering something new in it. The music moves out across the fjord and is carried upward by the particular acoustics of the valley, and then it is gone, dispersed into the air, but not entirely gone. The vibration of it persists in the body of anyone who heard it, in the particular way that music does, in the memory and the cells, long after the sound itself has faded. The stave church in the valley catches the last light of the day, its dark wooden walls warming slightly in the evening glow, its carved portal showing the interlacing patterns that speak of both the new faith and the old, the winding, vital serpents and vines that are the meeting point of the Norse aesthetic and the Christian, the place where two great traditions of imagining the sacred found a form they could share. The church has been here for centuries, and the valley has held it all that time, and will hold it for centuries more if the wood is cared for, which it will be, because caring for what is old and beautiful is one of the things Norwegians do well. Over generations, the Norwegian people have faced the challenges of their landscape with the qualities we have been tracing throughout this documentary: patience, attentiveness, practical competence, community solidarity, and a deep capacity for beauty that expresses itself not in the grand or the ornate but in the precise and the fitting. The bunad embroidered stitch by careful stitch. The open sandwich composed with the care of someone who knows that each element should be there for a reason. The hiking trail that goes exactly where it needs to go, marked by painted stones so that the wayfinder can navigate in any weather, in any season. The welfare state built, through decades of democratic work, to the proportions of the task it was designed to do. These are all, in their different ways, expressions of the same underlying orientation. The understanding that things done well are things done with attention to what is actually needed, what is actually true, what is actually beautiful in this particular place and time. As we gently move toward the end of our journey together, let the images of Norway settle slowly into stillness. The fjord in early morning, the water reflecting the mountains with perfect clarity. The family gathered on sit and mai, the children in their best clothes, the flags waving in the spring air. The height on a winter evening, the snow outside and the warmth within and the smell of coffee and the sound of someone putting more wood on the fire. The Hardingfeel playing in the mountain valley, the music rising and the silence receiving it. The stave church standing in its quiet meadow against the grey sky. The aurora moving across the northern night in its unhurried, improbable beauty. These images are not separate from one another. They are all aspects of a single, coherent culture, a way of being in the world that has been developed with care and intelligence across an enormous stretch of time, in one of the world's most beautiful and demanding landscapes. To have spent this time in the company of Norway's landscapes, stories, and people is to carry something away with you. Some small but real adjustment in the way you see the world, some memory of the fjords and the mountains and the long light of the northern summer that will return, unexpectedly, at quiet moments. The spirit of Norway continues to breathe quietly through its people, its stories, and its timeless traditions. Through the Hardingfeel and the deep melody, through the turning of the height door toward the morning light, through the movement of the hikers across the high plateau, through the prayer flags of the stave church lifting in the mountain air. It breathes through the long patience of the person who sits with their coffee and their book as the winter dark settles, through the warmth of the host who offers something to eat before they ask what brought you here, through the child learning to ski for the first time with the same unhurried confidence with which children have learned to ski in this place for as long as snow has fallen on these mountains. Now, let the sounds of Norway grow gentle and distant. Let the wind move softly through the birch forest. Let the stars come out, one by one, over the wide fjord. Let the height be warm. Let the aurora move in its slow, beautiful way across the sky. Let the music fade, slowly, into the enormous silence of the Norwegian night, that sky which is, in its particular quality of darkness and light, its extraordinary depth and clarity, its combination of the intimate and the infinite, like no other sky in the world. Rest now. The journey has been long and slow and beautiful, as all the best journeys are. The fjords will be here when you return. The mountains will be here. The height will be warm. Norway waits, patient and vast and alive, beneath the eternal sky. Thanks for watching. What culture would you like to learn about next? Comment below. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. See you on the next one.